Perfect. Thanks, Ron. All right. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about cloud security posture management, and I'm going to kind of flip it on its head where I'm not actually going to try to sell you a product here, but I want to more sell you on a service or an idea of something that you might need for, and you really should, actually implement into your environment. And every one of our talks so far have really kind of focused on some piece of security, but how do you really bring that all together? So that's what come on. There we go. All right. So just really quick, high level, who am I? So I am the Aaron Howell. I'm the managing consultant for our MAI team, also known as the Multi-Cloud Architecture and Innovations team. So not only do we focus on just cloud pieces, but we also focus on a lot of third-party integration. So you've heard a lot about API, serverless, those kind of things. My team does focus on those pieces as well. We do architecture as a service. We'll build a lot of different solutions for our customers that, as we were saying, it's not cookie cutter. It's very tailored to every individual platform. Every individual industry needs something different. So being able to utilize what our services are, we like to think security first in terms of the build process, and how are we going to bring that security that we currently have on-prem and kind of migrate that over to the cloud. A lot of organizations that we work with and we run into when we do a assessment for services inside of cloud, even just a basic CIS assessment, we see a typical score of 30 to 40% compliance. Now, we work with the customers as we go to either help remediate or check to see if there's any compensating controls, those kind of things. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, the cloud pieces, unless you were thinking about it in terms before the developers were even into it, the cloud has started to run away from our customers, and we're seeing that impact as we go forward. So in quick, a little bit more of a shameless plug, Ron kept talking about our continuous attack service management. That's a product that we currently utilize, and I'll have a trial at the end that you guys can run and try out for 14 days. So basically, you just give us some FQDNs or DNS entries, and we'll actually go and scan those continuously for any potential attack vectors that could be outside of your environment. So just your basic, even your API, we might be able to catch anything in your websites, anything that might be externally accessible. So that's our CASM engine. And going forward, implementing some of what I'm going to be talking about here, the cloud security posture management, into the CASM engine. So not only are you getting real time for external potential threats, but you're also getting real-time information about potential internal or misconfigurations. All right. So why is it needed? Well, cloud is programmable. It's API driven. A lot of things that we've discussed here today are all plugging into each other. There's a lot of custom development that needs to happen. Terraform, CloudFormation, if we're focusing on AWS, they're all driven by these API pieces. So as we start working with customers and customers start utilizing services, how are you managing that, not only from just a running perspective, but a build perspective as well? So as your developers are managing and maintaining these applications, how do you know that they're doing best practices or potential, opening up security vulnerabilities, or God forbid, going outside of your regulatory statutes? If you're PCI compliant, HIPAA compliant, those kind of things, you need to be able to make sure that you understand that. And so cloud has kind of given us those tools by being able to inject ourselves in any way, shape, or form. But really, how does that all come together? So another piece is, well, it's easy to use the new services. AWS just had a great couple things. They were talking about serverless and all these different pieces of the puzzle. But how are you actually managing the security inside of them? Or when they were talking about the machine learning pieces, well, that's great and all, but as a security-minded person, I'm like, okay, how can I talk to that AI? How could I potentially invoke it to do something that I don't want, that you as a customer developed? that you couldn't do. So those are the kind of things that you want to take into consideration when you're going after these services. And typically when you come to a well-architected framework, as AWS has with the pillars and everything, the security piece, it's not just one person, it's really the entire organization that is responsible for the security. The fundamental technologies differ from a typical physical DC. And really what I mean by that is it's not the security technologies, the firewall is still a firewall, an ACL is still an ACL, the network, right? It's really the decoupling of the applications, the server technologies from the overlying infrastructure that we're used to supporting, right? So not only, so you don't have to know about LACP, you don't have to know about layer 2, layer 3 potentially when it comes to cloud services. Sure, you tie them all in together, but really when you're operating in a cloud infrastructure, you're really going to be focusing on layer 5 and above, where you're just having the applications talk. And if there is something wrong, typically the AWS environment will heal itself because that's the way it's built. But when it comes down to troubleshooting, it's typically, hey, this application can't talk to this application, what's going on? And then, of course, the size and complexity. We talk a lot about auto scaling, about being able to scale up, scale out, being able to go across multiple regions, those kind of things. Well, if you don't have your build infrastructure and your cloud security figured out, you could potentially be opening up a lot of different that could open your application to something that you don't want.
Hey, Aaron.
Yeah.
Aaron, we're having, your voice is a little bit choppy. Maybe if you could just to make sure that it works well, maybe even turn off your camera just so we could hear you more clearly if there's any bandwidth conflicts.
Is that better?
Yes, turn the volume up though a little bit if you can, or maybe speak loud like this New Yorker.
All right, give me 1 second here. All right, how's that? Is that better?
Sounds good. What do people think? Sound better? Yeah, sounds
Apologies.
better.
I'm trying a new dual mic setup and I wasn't sure if it would work. Clearly it didn't. All right. So this slide here is a basic example of an application build out using just basic instances. These could be Lambda instances. They could be actual web servers that you're hosting, Linux, whatever you want to call. It's just a basic AWS setup. And as you look at it, it might start looking complicated, and it starts to become very complicated as you start building in these different services. So how are you, as someone who is focused on security or even is concerned about the security of your application, going to manage something like this environment? And that's where the cloud security posture management can help you. I know we're focused on AWS, so I'll skip the next slide. But basically, this is another piece. This is Azure's, the same build out from AWS. This is this build out for Azure. So common cloud security mistakes when it comes to these systems. Typically, we'll see unhardened systems. So just misconfigurations of Linux itself, misconfigurations of actual services, those kind of things. Excessively exposed services. So this is, I mentioned ACLs before, lack of firewall, lack of the basic security controls that we would expect on-prem to be able to secure us. Those seem to be sometimes missing in an entire architecture discussion, making sure that you have your WAFs in place, database listeners. A lot of things that we come across, and believe it or not, still is S3 buckets open to the public. Weak APIs, any kind of the code piece that I was talking about before, query injections, those kind of things. And how are you going to be able to test that if you don't have security people on-prem that might be able to test those things? Logging and monitoring. This is actually probably one of the biggest ones that I see as an issue. When it comes to the CIS compliance, there's about like 8 or 10 different controls for cloud, AWS in particular, that focus on log monitoring, flow data, all that kind of stuff. And I typically see most customers are missing, if not most of them, all of them, in terms of the security controls. And they're fairly easy to put in place, but how do you then manage that? How do you tell whether or not something is actually alerting on something that you might have been able to catch? I talked a little bit about the common pieces, the firewall, IPS, those kind of things. And then, of course, multi-factor, which was always, I think, at least for most of the customers that we run into, we've started to figure out that MFA is needed. So making sure that you have those authentication, but then what happens to the next piece of authentication, like location-based authentication, or removing where you have the second factor, but it's not based on the token codes, those kind of things. And then just remember, all in all, when you connect the cloud to your on-prem, you are building a branch of your environment. So making sure that you have its security controls, not only from the cloud and on-prem, but what's tying those two together. If you're using site to site, even if you're using something like Direct Connect, where you've got a direct connection into the environment based on an ISP, those are things you have to take in consideration as well. So what is CSPM? Well, it's Cloud Security Posture Management. So basically, what it comes down to, it analyzes the cloud infrastructure, be it a configuration, management, or the workloads running. A lot of CSPMs have moved into cloud workload protection as well. And basically, they monitor for potential issues with configurations of the actual scripts themselves or the build processes, as well as the running configurations of your cloud environment. So what can it do? Well, identify misconfigurations. So a great example of this one is that if you have a policy in place that says you should not allow S3 bucket public access, well, then that should be something that you are compliant with across the entire board. So what they can do is they can look at the JSON using the API integration, tie into those and say, oh, someone, admin A just configured an S3 bucket without that security piece in place. And what's interesting about Cloud Security Posture Management tools is that there's 2 modes. There's a monitor mode, and then there's what's called monitor and protect. Monitor mode basically does exactly what you expect it to do. It'll take the information from the API, the JSON calls, all those kind of things. It'll tell you that something went wrong and that you're outside of compliance for XY reason. There's also monitor and protect mode, which can actually roll back those configurations in real time and be able to then say, hey, admin A just made an unsecured S3 bucket. We've pulled back that configuration because it's not allowed per our policy. And now we've got an active log of, okay, this is what happened. And of course you can make, just exceptions to the rule kind of thing and all that, just in case you would need a use case for an S3 public bucket, for instance. But at least you're aware of that and you're aware of that escalation piece. And of course, a lot of the CSPMs come with integration to many different third-party tools, Slack, PagerDuty, those kind of things, to be able to alert you in real time, maybe your help desk or maybe your security team, whoever it is, that maybe that a policy might have been violated, that might be a problem. I talked about the remediation auto. It can compare configurations from industry standards. So a lot of what we do at SynerComm when we do our CIS is we take a CSPM and we'll integrate it into your system and we'll take snapshots as we go. And what we'll notice is that as we start showing these holes in the security environment, things start closing up. And then in real time, we can then assess that and say, hey, you guys are doing great. You've closed 20% of what we found originally just before our assessment. And our assessments take typically like 2 or 3 weeks as a snapshot. But basically, we can pull that information in and then be able to show, the bosses, the executive level suite, whoever, that there is active work going on as in the security standpoint to be able to close those gaps. And then, of course, because of the way that the cloud changes and it's ephemeral, the continuous monitoring is key importance. So just because you hire someone like us that we take snapshots, you do an audit and assessment thing for your compliance, for your whatever your data security insurance that you've got going on, just because you do that doesn't mean that you are fully safe from a breach. And as we like to say, you always assume that you're going to be breached at some point in time. So how do you mitigate that? So some of the basic use cases, and obviously there's many more use cases, but lack of encryption at rest or in transit, this is a big one. Typical configurations of some serverless environments will have HTTP turned on by default. Even though they're not really communicating on that port, it's still turned on, and that could potentially be an attack vector if someone spins something up that's listening. Improper key management. So API secrets, authentication keys, those kind of things. Not only do you have the capability in the cloud environments, AWS, with using the key management systems, but you can also do auto rotation of those keys themselves. So that way, if one would get out there for whatever means, because you're using the management systems, being able to pull those keys or being able to take them out of rotation if need, or automatically rotate them. And that's a big one as well. Account permissions. This one is something that we're asked all the time. And basically it says, hey, can you look at all my users that are inside of my environments from an admin, from a dev standpoint, and what permissions are they actually being given? And a lot of the times we'll find that there's overly permissible permissions for users as we break down just the whole thing. And it's based on the policies. It's based on the roles that are assigned. There are governing, or there's embedded roles versus the actual roles that they were assigned to. Maybe someone said, oh, okay, this developer needed X amount of access, but it turned out that they gave them a more admin privilege, and then that was never pulled back. So those are the kind of things that you can catch with these tools as well. MFA detection, misconfigured network connectivity, all those pieces that they look for. And again, it all comes down to the way that these work is you can build your own policies, your own pieces, digging into the API. And of all the cloud security posture managements I've used, everyone's got their own query language to basically query not only the API piece, but the JSON that comes back to be able to look at certain keys, look at different pieces. And with that, you have the capability of not just using the pre-canned stuff, which it's always nice for me as an engineer. I like having that visibility into, okay, what are you actually alerting on? And a lot of these tools have that visibility where it's, okay, it's not just showing you, hey, you're out of compliance and you should fix it. It's going to show you exactly how it was detected, where was it identified, and how can you fix it? And the explanation of why you should fix it or why this might be a false positive, depending on what you're doing. So
hey, Aaron,
you have, yep.
When you're doing all of this continuous monitoring, Michael Vukovic. Michael, where do you work at again? Let me know via the Q&A. Had a question, and I'm sure it's shared by many. How do you ensure there's no performance impact on your users?
Well, the performance impacts for these particular pieces, at least for the integration into APIs, are just going to be your API call connections. It typically just, it's almost like another user's logged in and then pulling all the roles. I haven't seen any performance impacts. There are ways of doing cloud workload protection that you can, there's 4 different ways, right? You can do basic API integration into the cloud itself. Then there's other ways to actually integrate into the containers, the serverless, or you can integrate shims, is what I like to call them, into the applications. So if you're concerned about potential application performance, you might want to be at a higher tier than actually, let's say, shimming that piece into your application. You might want to stay at the container or in a Kubernetes cluster. All you need is just one container running. And that then basically operates at the kernel layer with the host, being able to pull all that information in. But in terms of utilizing the APIs and stuff, I haven't really seen performance impacts. Does that answer the question? I'm going to take that as a yes then.
All right. Sorry, still on mute. Yes. This is Michael with the City of Columbia. Go Gamecocks. And I believe, Michael, you can reply back to make sure we answered your question. The answer is basically there's really not a performance impact.
No, I haven't seen one, even as we scale out, do auto scaling, those kind of things. And remember, there's not just one, and that's my standpoint, is that it's not just one vendor doing this. Multiple vendors are getting on board. I think it would turn into a magic quadrant, or at least it was on Gartner's radar as of last year. People are starting to get an idea that this is needed. And so the two that come to mind just immediately, and actually one of the products that I saw here today was very close to what I would call a cloud security posture management, would be the Prisma Cloud by Palo Alto, and then the Cloud Guard by Checkpoint. But AWS, Azure, they all have answers to this piece too, with be it any of their products. And really what's interesting about that is, as you start looking at the different clouds and all the different services that they spin up, they're all starting to migrate over to that security, right? There's security checklists and scorecards and those kind of things. But when it comes to the in-depth piece, and what I like to say is, who's watching the watchers? If I have just one vendor throughout my entire prem, there might be an issue where there's a big security vulnerability, and that one vendor might have been the only one infected or affected. So those are the kind of things that I like to think about when it comes to that. But there are multiple vendors doing this. And really, again, what I'm trying to get at here is, you guys should at least, if you're in the cloud, which I assume most people are who's in these talks, to be able to start thinking about this, and not only just snapshots in time, but also the continuous piece, because they're going to catch the potential bad actors, even who got someone's security credentials in your environment. All of a sudden you see, you're using machine learning and all those other buzzwords to be able to identify patterns within the behavior, and basically do threat hunting for you before your analysts even get a red alert that something's going on.
Well, this is all great stuff, and whatever solution you deploy, I can just tell you, as Aaron goes through some of these concluding comments, that there are lots of entities who thought they were protected. They took advantage of that free trial, and then they go and, holy bleep, look what's happening. And it's a nice, simple solution, easy to test out, easy to configure. And I encourage everyone to take advantage of this, because the cyber criminals are absolutely not resting in between your more static penetration testing exercises. That's why you need tools, be it from some other vendors or from SynerComm, to ensure that this is part of your defense in-depth strategy.